Today I'm going to show you how I painted my World Eater's Eightbound. There's absolutely nothing tricky in this tutorial, and at the end of it you'll have minis that you can be proud of. I sprayed the minis with grey cere from a rattle can, but you could use any light spray at all. It needs to be light though, because we're going to use a lot of contrast and it doesn't work over a darker undercoat. We'll start off by applying Flesh Tearer's red contrast on all the armour straight out of the pot. This is a wonderful colour. The way the armour is shaped on these guys, like raw muscles, means that the contrast works very nicely. It darkens the recesses and covers beautifully. It doesn't matter if you get any of this on the trim, but try your hardest not to touch any of the flesh areas, as it will cause a headache with the next step and you'll need to go back and put more grey cere on it to cover up your mistakes. There are two guys at my work who have recently bought their first miniatures. One of the guys has dived right in, learning, making mistakes and just generally having a lot of fun with it. He'll be past my level in no time because he's brave and he's passionate about learning, and he'll go out his way to learn a new technique. The other one's really enthusiastic about the hobby. He plays a lot of D&D and he really wanted to get into AOS, so he bought the Beastman box. But he's too scared to build or paint any of it because he automatically thinks he won't be good at it. And he 100% won't be if he doesn't ever try. I absolutely hate the thought that there are people out there that won't buy models that they absolutely love because they're too afraid to give it a go. So my aim is to make these simple tutorials which everyone can follow, and if it encourages even one person to get into this hobby and open up the vast array of joy that we all experience, then that's fantastic. There's nothing quite like painting a miniature and then just having it physically in front of you and knowing it's all your work. It's amazing. If that sounds like something you could get on board with, why not drop me a like or even subscribe and tell me about your painting journey in the comments below. Anyway, back to painting. The next step is applying Guilliman flesh contrast on all the fleshy bits. It's up to you how you apply this. A heavier coat will leave you with dark recesses, and a light coat will leave you with lighter recesses. I went for a light coat, but I'd maybe vary it for other members of the squad just to give them a different skin tone. The Guilliman flesh is a great starting point and really brings out the contours of the muscles, which makes it easier to highlight later on. And don't forget the backpack. There's a lot of flesh there, which is a first for me, but then I've not painted a lot of Chaos Weirdos. Next we'll apply the best Black Legion contrast on the crotch cloth, belt, the soles of the boots, and also the weapons. I painted the whole of the chain axe with Black Legion, except for the bits that will be gold trim, although the gold will cover over it easily enough. From this point on, all your paints should be thin so that they run off the brush easily enough, but they don't flood the area that you're painting. I use a wet palette and I mix a tiny little bit of water in with all the paints that I use, even the metallics. This doesn't apply for contrast because they're all used straight out of the pot, no thinning at all. You'll hear everyone complaining about painting trim on Chaos Marines, and these guys have a lot of it, but I find it quite therapeutic. Sure, it takes a while, but when you manage to angle your brush just right, and you take out a whole strip at once, it's glorious. I used Dragon's Gold from 2 thin coats for this, but Retributor armour could be used too. So take your time on all the trim on the armour, the weapons and the backpack. There's a lot of gold trim on the shoulder pad, so get it all and try to avoid the teeth as much as possible. Always good advice. There are a lot of bones, horns and teeth on these minis, and instead of getting hung up on how to paint each one, I just painted them all with the same colours, just in different ways. So use Dragon Fang from 2 thin coats, or Zandri dust from Citadel to base coat the teeth on the shoulder pad, the teeth above the head, the big knee pad skull, the skull hanging from the crotch cloth, and the horns sticking out of the leg armour. There are also little tiny teeth all over the weapons, so try to catch them too, but they're a pain in the bum. The silver metal bits are base coated with Surcoat Silver from 2 thin coats or Leadbelcher from Citadel. Specifically, the silver bits are the crotch cloth chains, the weapon teeth, and the stabby bits on the end of the chainsword. We'll also hit the armour plugs on the arms and torso, the chain axe teeth, the rest of the back of the axe, the power nodes, and the weapon chain and bracelet. Don't forget the backpack, because I clearly did and filmed very little footage of it, but it's painted in exactly the same way as the main model. The chain holding the skull and all the vents need a little bit of silver on them. On my test model, which I always do when I'm embarking on a new colour scheme, I painted the cables with yellow, but they just get lost against the gold, so I opted for bright green on this guy. I painted all the arm and neck cables with Warpstone glow, very carefully because I didn't want to ruin the skin, and I picked out the smooth cables on the butcher's nails on his head in the same colour. There are also 2 in the backpack, and you can see them from the front of the model, so it's important you hit them. No skimping. Because we're using contrast, there are really only 2 washes that we're interested in. Agrax Earthshade is the first shade we'll use, and it very simply goes on all the bone areas and all the gold. Take extra special care to make sure it doesn't pool on the gold trim, because it dries sludgy and really dark brown. If there's too much, it just looks awful. If you do get a pool, dry off your paintbrush and dip it into the overspill and it will soak it right up. Nuln oil is used to darken down all the silver bits and add a bit of interest to the metal. We'll apply it to the axe head, weapon teeth, chain, armour interfaces and any other silver bits on the model. Don't flood the areas, especially the plugs in the skin, because it'll be difficult to come back from that. We're using Skeleton Legion, another 2 thin coats paint, as the first highlight for all the bone, horns and teeth areas. The Citadel equivalent's Ushabti bone, but I feel that's a bit lighter than Skeleton Legion. It should work fine though. So all I do with these highlights, it's not difficult, you just leave a little bit of the previous colour on the model. If you're painting a horn for example, just leave a little bit of the darker colour at the base, and then start painting your highlight higher up the horn. And then for the highlight after that, you'll just do that again, just a little bit higher up again. Moot green is the colour to highlight all the green cables. Simply run a nice even line of moot green down the middle of each cable. That's all you need to do. It works for the smooth ones and the butcher's nails too. Now we'll get onto the skin, and because there's a lot of skin, this is a step that you'll really want to take your time with. I used Dwarven flesh from 2 thin coats, but you could use Cadian Fleshtone if that's what you've got to hand. All these faces on the 8-bound are so expressive, so they all take highlights really well. The main bits you'll want to highlight are the eyebrows, the cheekbones, and I do down the jaw, round there, and a little bit on the chin. For the big round shoulder, try to keep to the direction of the muscle fibres and the top rounded portion of the shoulder muscle. Try to leave some Guilliman flesh in the recesses. Take your time, try to do this to all the flesh, it'll really make a big difference. And once again, don't forget the backpack, just treat it exactly the same way as the other skin. The first highlight on the red armour is Wazdakka red. Don't worry if it all looks a bit too light or pink, we'll deal with that later on. For now, just try to highlight the armour as if it is bare muscle. I line highlighted all the edges, leaving the dark red in the deeper bits. I also used the side of the brush to edge highlight all the sharper armour panels. For me it's very difficult to make black paint on a miniature look interesting, but for this one it was fairly easy. I simply applied one edge highlight of Dawnstone to all black bits. The wraps in the weapon shaft are important as it gives a feeling that you've really tried to highlight everything. I didn't want to mess around with blending in the weapon, so I just very carefully applied an inside line highlight to all the black areas. These are possibly the thinnest lines that I've ever painted consistently, but the trick is to take a lot of time and fix your mistakes. Also, you need a really good point on your brush. The belts and loincloth take an edge highlight very well, so I did that. It's so simple, but pretty effective. Next we'll edge highlight all the gold, and this is a very important step for me to make it all shine. I know a lot of people prefer brass for their corn guys, but I prefer the bright gold instead. It's just more pleasing to my eye. I made a few mistakes here, so I just went back in with Flesh Tearer's red, which covers them up fine. Even though it's a contrast paint, it does cover really well. The more edges you hit here, the more favoured you'll be by corn. There's gold in the backpack too, so don't forget about that. For highlighting all the silver areas, I used Mythril blade from 2 thin coats, but Stormhost silver is very similar, so just use what you've got. It should just be a very light silver. The axe head has a ton of metal on it, but it's all ripe for a side of the brush edge highlight, so it should be okay. I painted the chainsword power plant with silver, so just did exactly the same thing on that. If you're careful, it can look great, but it's easy to overdo a big silver highlight. It's nothing to worry about, I've done it loads of times on this model and I'm still really pleased with the outcome, but just try to be as neat as possible. The weapon chain and bracelet got the smallest of highlights, but it still really gives the illusion of old metal with bright spots rubbed into it. Don't put away your bright silver yet, we're going to apply the slightest of highlights to the gold. Just a few very tiny ones dotted around here and there. There's a tendency for me to glob it on if I can't see it on the miniature very well, and then when I see photos of my work it sticks out like a sore thumb. So just trust that you're improving the effect of the shiny gold, and even if you can't see much, it's definitely there. Back to the skin now, and we're using a lighter flesh tone than before. I'm using Elven flesh from 2 thin coats, but you could just as easily use Kislev flesh from Citadel. What I try to do when painting faces, and I'm not saying this is the best way to do it by far, I really need to improve my face painting, but it's easy, is to highlight the previous layer I've applied. The eyebrow flesh, for example, this guy got his eyebrows singed off, gets a line highlight on the topmost bit of it. The trick is to lighten bits that are facing upwards and would catch more light, like his brow, his cheekbones, the nose, the top lip, and then you can define other areas like the jawbone and the chin. This will get you some of the way to painting a good face, but there are obviously more in-depth tutorials on how to do that, and I don't want to introduce too much complexity to the paint job. If you remember the way we did the shoulders earlier, try to do even thinner lines along the muscle fibres and don't go as far down the shoulder. The hundreds of muscle fibres on these guys are a really nice touch, but if I'm honest, they make the muscles much trickier to paint. On the hands, just go along the tendons and try to bring out the knuckles a bit more. And don't forget the backpack. After that, I used Flayed One Flesh from Citadel, which is another step lighter, just to do exactly the same thing to the face, arms and hands, except even smaller highlights. I find it easiest to just imagine myself highlighting inside my previous highlights. Try to use this paint sparingly as it can look a bit stark if it's overdone. You can really see it coming together now. Next I used Wild Rider Red to line highlight the red armour, just following exactly the same principle as before. Remember our Wazdakka red highlight? We're trying to highlight that. Once again, this might look a bit bright, but we'll be tying it all together later on, and without the use of any advanced techniques like blending, so don't worry about that. Take your time with the armour as it's a large part of the mini. Highlight all the edges of the muscle-like armour and catch any sharp edges with the side of your brush. The top highlight for all the bone and horns will be Screaming Skull. I wanted to go a fair bit brighter than what was on there before. I edge highlighted the skulls, just leaving a small bit of the previous bone colour and the brown in the recesses, and for the horns I just painted a bit further up them than the previous layer. I took my time on the knee teeth, and there's a sentence I never thought I'd be uttering, and I painted a highlight on every single one of them. I wasn't very precise with this, they're far too small for me to see properly, so I just tried to aim for the tip and hope I didn't get too much on. It seemed to work fine though. The shoulder pad teeth got a highlight on the sharp top edge, then I painted the sides in a little bit. There are teeth and horns on the backpack too, so I took time with them as well. I decided to paint the teeth and eyes with Screaming Skull, and it worked out very well. For the teeth, I found it easiest to get only a small amount of paint on my brush, not too thin, then angle the mini so I was looking down on it, and just to be clear, that's the miniature's teeth, not the teeth that are all over them. I then dragged my brush along the teeth and it caught them really well. For the eyes, it's just a case of getting a sharp tip in your brush, bracing your hands against the desk, and hoping you just get the eyeballs. Turn the model any way you can to get easy access to his peepers. If you get a bit on the eyelids, just get a bit of your flesh colour and tidy it up afterwards, no big deal. Now this is a bit where we tie the armour together, and it is as easy as applying a layer of Carroburg Crimson across all the armour areas. It dulls down the highlights a bit, but they'll still show through and add a bit of interest. We're not done with the Carroburg Crimson yet. There's a lot of stuff sticking out of Space Marine, even more so with the World Eater, and that stuff must tug at the skin and make it a bit sore, even if they'd never admit it, a bit like a hospital cannula. Everywhere a pipe, cable or interface entered the flesh, I added a little bit of Carroburg Crimson to make the skin look angry and inflamed. It's a small touch but adds a lot to it in my opinion. I was very careful not to add too much as it can quickly look a bit daft, but I painted a lot more around his butcher's dreads because those things must pull. Turn your model in your hands and look for bits you've missed and tidy them up. And for the love of corn, don't forget the backpack. For the base I just applied Stirland mud, dry brushed with Baneblade brown and added a tuft. I used a bit of blood for the blood god to paint some blood on the tuft. I will admit I could have spent more time on the base, but this isn't about the base, this is about painting the miniature. So just do the base however you want to fit into your army or your battlefield. And that's it. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe for more, and if you're looking for something else to watch, I'd recommend this one. Cheers.